Welcome. My name is Kyle Briscoe, Technical Development Manager with C Corporation. And I'm here today to talk about plant growth regulators, or PGRs. Specifically, I want to talk about understanding PGRs for the turf and landscape. So as a little background into PGRs, plant growth regulators, traditionally there's been two types of PGRs, type 1 and type 2. They were reclassified a few years back into classes A to F. For turf, I'm going to focus on class A and class B, which were formerly type 2 PGRs. By far and away the most widely used PGRs in the turf and landscape. And they regulate the turf by inhibiting GA, or gibberellic acid biosynthesis. GA is responsible for cell elongation within the plant. So when you inhibit GA biosynthesis, you reduce the length of the cell, ultimately reducing the length of the leaf blades or the shoots if you're talking about ornamentals. And that leads to less trimming or mowing required over the course of the season. So I don't want to get into a biochemistry lesson here, but I think it's very important to explain the different classes that are available in turf, class A versus class B. And I wanted to start with their site of action. I mentioned the mode of action is inhibiting GA biosynthesis. And what we have here is the gibberellic acid biosynthesis pathway. It starts with glycolysis up at the top left. If you follow the arrows around, down to the bottom right, you get to cell elongation. So starting at the very top with your class A's, or your late GA inhibitors, you have Primo Max, which the active ingredient is trinexapac ethyl, and you have a new, which is prohexadione calcium. And then you move over to the class B's, which are known as early GA inhibitors. You have Cutlass with the active ingredient fliprimidol, and Trimit, which is paclibutrazol. So as you move into the figure, you see the red X's. And starting with the class A's, I said late GA inhibitors. If you go down there towards the bottom right and you see where it says class A site of inhibition, so that's late in the GA biosynthesis pathway. Therefore, your class A's are your late GA inhibitors versus your class B's kind of being up there in the middle to the left. That's the site of inhibition, being early GA inhibitors. So basically, same mode of action, different sites of action, and effectively influence the plant and plant species a little bit different. So as a little cartoon depiction on how class A and class B PGRs work, on the left, we have plant cells, untreated plant cells. You see the chloroplast in the middle. You follow the arrow to the right, having been treated with either a class A or class B PGR. Again, you're inhibiting GA biosynthesis, so you're reducing cell elongation, you're compacting those cells, but you have the same amount of chlorophyll in those cells, so you get more chloroplast per unit cell area, effectively enhancing that dark green color that you see after a PGR application. So moving into the products available for turf, the PGR products available for turf, we'll start with the class A's. Again, Primo Max and a new. They were late GA inhibitors. They are foliar absorbed. And then I've got three attributes that they're mainly used for in turf. So you've got growth suppression, you've got color and quality enhancement, and then when we're talking about a new, you have Poa annua, or annual bluegrass suppression. So looking at the class B's, being Cutlass and Trimit, again, the class B's are early GA inhibitors. They're root absorbed. So unlike class A's, class B's are root absorbed instead of foliar absorbed. And the attributes are a little bit different in terms of what they're mainly used for in turf. Number one is annual bluegrass or Poa annua suppression, and then growth suppression of your desired turf grass, and then color and quality enhancement. So similar attributes, but class B is working a little bit different from class A's, which I'll get into in a little bit. There are also class A plus class B PGR products for turf, so premix products. The first one being Legacy, which is a combination of Cutlass and Primo. So you've got one early and one late GA inhibitor. What that gives you is both foliar and root absorption. And that's important because when you move to the attributes where you get growth suppression, but you get less rebound. And I'll talk about rebound coming up. But essentially what combining a early GA and a late GA inhibitor, a class A and a class B, does is reduce the amount of rebound that you do see. You still get the color and quality enhancement, probably more enhancement color and quality wise out of the legacy product than either a class A or class B alone. You do get the poa-annua suppression because you have the cutlass in there. And what we see is a more uniform regulation of mixed turf species. There's one other premix on the market called Musketeer. It's a combination of Cutlass, Trimmet, and Primo. So you've got 2 Class Bs and 1 Class A. Again, foliar and root absorption. You've got growth suppression with less rebound. Where Musketeer really differentiates from Legacy is in poa-annua suppression. Since you do have Cutlass and Trimmet in the formulation, you get more poa-annua suppression than you get with Legacy. You also get more uniform regulation of POA biotypes. Again, you get the color and quality enhancement that you see with Legacy, and then the uniform regulation of mixed turf species. So when I start conversations with folks on PGR programs, I like to start with these 5 questions. It's really, what is your objective of a PGR program? What species do you have? What species of turf do you have? What's the playing surface? What's the height of cut? How much POA do you have? Do you want to suppress the POA? Do you want to reduce the POA? And then how much growth suppression do you want of your desired turf species? So you answer these 5 questions in some detail, and it's pretty easy to determine what PGR program to implement on your surface. All right, moving into growth suppression with PGRs. This is a visual depiction of perennial ryegrass. You've got PGR treated on the left, untreated on the right. Typical response with the PGR on the left, you've got darker green, more dense, obviously shorter, more compact. You have a regulated plants on the left compared to the right. Which is obviously very common with what you see after a PGR application. And I say that to say, a lot of people think that increasing the PGR rate increases the length of regulation. So if I double my PGR rate, I'm going to double the length of regulation. It's actually not that true. It's true in a little bit of a sense, but really what increasing PGR rate does is increase maximum suppression. So if you look at this figure and you look at the middle bar versus the right bar, so you go from PGR from a mid rate to a high rate. Just going from that mid rate to a high rate almost doubled your maximum suppression. But I can promise you it did not double your length of regulation. So that's important to remember. Yes, you may get a couple more days if you up the PGR rate. But you're certainly going to get a lot more suppression in general. Excuse me. Now, Dr. Bill Kreuzer, that created the Greenkeeper app, has modeled all the PGRs and has looked at maximum suppression of the various products. And so I'm not going to go product by product, but this is on creeping bentgrass greens. You have maximum growth suppression of Primo being about 20%, and as you move down the list, up to 40 or 50%, depending on if we're talking about either Musketeer or Trimmet. So that's creeping bentgrass greens. You move to creeping bentgrass fairways, and you see where the growth suppression with Primo, maximum growth suppression was only 20% on greens. Now you're up to 80% on fairways. So it's important to remember, yes, the rates are higher, but the maximum growth suppression is a lot higher as well. So what I think the jury's still out on the reason that you get so much more growth suppression on the fairways and the greens, but I think it has a lot to do with the amount of mowing. So the more mowing on greens, the more removal of that PGR you have. I also believe that it has to do with the overall density of the turf, where you've got much more dense, more plants per unit area on greens than on fairways. But just make sure that you realize that you're going to get a lot more growth suppression on your fairways than you are on your greens at a given rate. All right, I mentioned Rebound. So this figure depicts Rebound of 2 PGR products. In the green line, you have Primo. On the blue line, you have Legacy, which is that combination of Cutlass and Primo. The red stars denote the applications. So there was an application about every 28 days. And then if you move to the red oval on the right, you can see where that Rebound. And Rebound being the point where obviously the turf has been suppressed and now it's starting to come back up. With the green line with Primo, you have that green line actually crossing the gray line, which is the untreated. Whereas, as I mentioned, when you mix the Class A and Class B PGR together, being the Legacy, you do get some rebound, but you don't get a severe rebound as you'd see with just, say, straight Primo. So what's this mean from a golf course perspective or a turf perspective in general? Generally, it means just better turf color, better turf quality. And that comes from less rebound, less scalping in that rebound phase. So this happens to be 419 Bermuda grass, 4 weeks after the final application. You got untreated on the left, you got Primo in the middle, and you've got your Legacy, which is 12 ounces of Cutlass MUC plus 6 ounces of Primo on the right. And you can see the difference in the scalping between the photos, whether you're talking about untreated or Primo versus what you have with the Legacy. And that is due to just the reduction in rebound that you have with the Legacy. All right, moving from growth suppression and rebound to using PGRs to reduce POA. By far and away, the Class Bs, so your Cutlass and your Trimmet, and your Legacy, which has Cutlass in it, and then obviously Musketeer, which has Cutlass and Trimmet in it. So your Class Bs are the most effective. And the objective being to use PGRs not as a herbicide, rather you're regulating POA with the Class Bs more than you're regulating the desired turfgrass species. So ultimately, over time, you convert it into a lot less POA and a lot more desirable turfgrass. It's essentially allowing the desirable turfgrass to outcompete. As you see on the pictures on the right, you have unregulated POA there at the top picture, the top right, and then regulated, treated with the Class B PGR. You see how regulated the POA is. You see the creeping bentgrass literally outcompeting the POA in that photo because the POA is not growing. Now, it varies on how aggressive that you want to get with the PGR program, but when we've seen, reductions of POA from 20 to 80% using a Class B PGR program over the course of the season. From a visual depiction, in these pots, you've got both Class A PGR being Primo down there at the bottom left. You got your untreated at the top left. And then you've got your products that contain the Class B PGRs, whether it's straight fliperimetol being Cutlass, straight paclobutrazol being Trimmet, your Cutlass Primo and your Legacy, and then Cutlass, Trimmet, and Primo and Musketeer. And really, you can see the difference in the size of POA treated with Primo at the bottom left again versus all the other products. So anything with a Class B in it is going to be very good at suppressing POA growth. From a field perspective, again, I kind of showed this in the previous slide, but you have their POA that's very regulated. This happens to be on a putting green. And then you have your creeping bentgrass literally growing through that POA, outcompeting it. From a trials perspective, over the course of a season, that's always the question. How much can I reduce my POA over the course of the season using a Class B PGR program? This was in Lexington, Kentucky, a creeping bentgrass fairway with PGRs applied 8 times during the growing season. So you have your untreated on the left, you have Primo in the center, and you have Cutlass 50W on the right. And you can see those light patches amongst the dark green creeping bentgrass. Those light patches are the POA. And if you look from the untreated to the Primo, there's probably 60 to 80% POA in there versus the Cutlass, which is probably 20 to 30%. And it's a fairly aggressive Cutlass program here, but you can see just the reduction in the POA by using Cutlass versus using Primo over the course of one season on a creeping bentgrass fairway. All right, being this day and age and the increasing prices in labor and fuel, I get a lot of questions on, can PGRs save me money, reducing mowing, reducing labor needed. And so, I started thinking about it and thinking about the conversations that I have. And everybody wants to talk about PGRs on greens. And so, whether we're talking about growth suppression or we're talking about POA suppression or we're talking about color and quality, I have significantly fewer conversations about fairway PGR programs. And I think a lot of that is due to the PGR cost, the cost required to treat 20 or 25 acres of fairways versus 3 to 4 acres of greens. But PGRs can reduce the number of mowings per week. And ultimately, what it comes down to is can you reduce the number of mowings? Can you reduce the blowing and the labor associated and the fuel associated to not only pay for your PGRs, but to save you dollars on top of that? And I think the answer is yes in most cases. So we set out and we developed a calculator. And this is just screenshots of the calculator, but essentially it's calculating the cost of a fairway mowing program with and without PGRs over the course of a season. Now, it does not account for equipment maintenance. It only takes account for PGR cost, labor cost, fuel cost. You can add in clipping removal cost and irrigation as well. And I just want to provide an example. On 25 acres of fairways, and as you move down the bullet points, so your standard program is 3 mowings a week, and you got 2 mowers and you got 2 blowers, and your labor is $18. And essentially, as you make it to the 4th bullet point down, you've got a program for the total mowing and blowing being about $23,000. So take a legacy program at 15 ounces of legacy on a 21-day interval. You're looking at about $9,500 in PGR cost. And then as you start reducing mowing and blowing, you get all the way down to the bottom bullet point in red, and you've got your total savings by eliminating blowing. So eliminating blowing altogether and eliminating 1 mowing per week is not only going to pay for the PGRs, but it's going to save you about $4,000. And, this is obviously numbers plugged into a calculator, but this was actually a real world. We worked with a golf course this year to come up with these numbers. And that golf course was able to do just this, eliminate blowing altogether and eliminate 1 mowing a week and saved about $4,000 to $5,000 over the course of the season. So it is possible. I think it depends on everyone's situation, but we do have a calculator available. All right, moving from turf PGRs to PGRs for landscape ornamentals. So again, just a little background. Class B PGRs, I talked about Class Bs in turf, and I mainly talked about Class Bs around POA suppression. So we're going to talk about Class Bs and ornamentals around actual regulation. So what's this look like from a plant level when you reduce GA or gibberellic acid biosynthesis in the plants and the shrubs? What you're effectively doing from the picture on the left to the picture on the right is reducing the internode length. So you're shortening those cells, you're reducing the internode length, you reduce the size of the leaves a little bit, definitely not to the extent that you see in turf, but you do see a pop in dark green color from that reduction in leaf size, and ultimately you've got much shorter shoots and less trimming involved. I do want to talk about Class C PGRs. I did not. There are no Class C PGRs in turf, so I saved this for the ornamental piece. Class C PGRs are completely different in their mode of action. They actually inhibit cell division at the meristems. So it doesn't have anything to do with GA. It doesn't have anything to do with shortening internodes. It literally it stops the cell division so that plant doesn't continue to grow out from the growing points. All right, moving into the landscape PGR benefits, whether we're going to talk about plant health and quality, or operational, economic. I mean, I think all three are very important to the landscape professional. From a plant health and quality standpoint, whether you're getting more dense, more uniform plants, there's some species that actually PGRs enhance flowering. You kind of see that at the bottom right photo on the slide. Operational, I think what everybody's looking for is just less time, less frequency trimming, reduce risk of, accidents. See the guy on the ladder in the top right. The less time he's got to be on the ladder holding that trimmer, the less chance for an accident. And then reduce cleanup. If you're having to pay for dump fees, and that gets into economics, but ultimately it's time, and then it becomes money. And whether we're talking about, saving on trimming or saving on dump fees, or, the amount of times trimming, basically what we come up with nearly in every scenario is using PGRs will reduce your trimming or your economic savings, or reduce your dump fees by about 50%. It ranges from 30 to 70%, but right around 50% by using a PGR program. So moving into the products that are available for landscape ornamentals. So you've got your Class B granular products. Cutlass 33G is a straight fluoprimidol product. Cutlass Shrub and Tree Sculptor is fluoprimidol plus paclobutrazol. So all Class B active ingredients, which again, early GA inhibitors, they're root absorbed. The granular products applied similar to a granular fertilizer. The knock on the granular products are they are very slow to regulate. So people looking for that kind of instant gratification doesn't happen with the granular products. 3,3-G, it can take up to about 4 weeks to kick in for the regulation to really kick. Shrub and Tree Sculptor, it could be up to 8 weeks, and I'll get into why that is here in the next couple slides. However, the granular products do provide long-term regulation. So depending on geography, it could be season-long regulation, up to 6 months with Cutlass G, or even a year with Shrub and Tree Sculptor, depending on obviously rate and species, but it is long-term regulation. And so you compare that to your Class B foliar products. So there is a straight fluoprimidol product called Cutlass Quick Stop. There's also a couple straight paclobutrazol products, Trim Tech and Shortstop, all being Class B foliar products. Again, they're early GA inhibitor, but these are foliar absorbed. So they actually absorb into the foliage, into the growing tissue, applied similar to foliar fungicides and insecticides. The two main differences between the Class B foliar and the Class B granular are the foliar provides quick regulation, so about 1 week after application, but it is shorter term, so up to 4 months. It's really kind of species dependent that I'll get into here in a little bit. You also have a Class C. I mentioned the Class C. Atramec is the product that's been around for a long time. It inhibits cell division at the growing points. But again, it's applied similar to Class B foliar. It's foliar absorbed. It's applied similar to fungicides and insecticides. Works fairly quickly. Probably across species with the shortest term regulation, up to about 3 months compared to your Class B foliar products with about 4 months. All right, a little disclaimer before I move into the application methods of granular and foliar PGRs for the landscape. Do not apply these PGRs to annuals. They're not labeled for annuals. I understand annuals often exist in landscape beds where there are perennials that you want to treat. As you see in the photo, if you do get some drift, from a foliar application or maybe a sloppy granular application, you will regulate the annuals and they will not grow basically the entire growing season. It creates a non-uniform appearance that you can see in the photo. It just doesn't look very good. So the annuals won't die, they just won't grow. So don't be careful where you're applying, and make sure not to apply obviously directly to the annuals. All right, so choosing the best PGR. Depending on whether we're talking about granular or foliar, you got to know your species and you've got to know your height. And then depending on your situation, what setup is best for you? Are you best set up to apply a granular? Or are you best set up for a foliar application? Or can you do both? And then select the best PGR for the job. I think that really comes down to more, obviously, your species and your height, but also what method of application you're set up for. And then treat plants with the appropriate application rate. Every product has a table, has literature available that has application rates by species. Moving into the granular PGR application. So I mentioned there was two granular PGRs for landscape. Cutlass 33G, which is straight flupriminol, and then Cutlass Shrub and Tree Sculptor, which is flupriminol plus paclobutrazol. The key difference between the two is where they're used in terms of the size of shrubs. Cutlass 33G is usually targeted at shrubs less than 7 feet. And then the Shrub and Tree Sculptor, being that it has more active ingredient in it, is targeted for your taller species, so 5 to 15 feet. Regardless whether we're talking about 33G or Shrub and Tree Sculptor, the application rates are in pounds of product per 1,000 square feet. The rates are based on species and plant height. It can be applied straight over the top of shorter woody shrubs and herbaceous perennials. That's what I would actually recommend. I think it gets the most uniform application whenever you apply over the top. With your larger shrubs, though, where you can't get over the top, you will need to try to make a uniform application within the drip line. Again, these are granular products, so they will need rainfall or irrigation within a week or so. I recommend a 1/2 inch to really drive that active ingredient into the root zone. In terms of application, various methods, small areas, belly grinders, larger areas, you see that vortex unit that actually blows the material into the shrub is very effective. So there are various ways to apply. I think it really kind of comes down to your situation and what species, the size of the species that you have. All right, how the granular PGR products work, I think, is very, very important to understanding and actually implementing an effective granular PGR program. So, as I mentioned, you've got to apply it to the drip line, make a uniform application, whether you're going over the top. You see that depicted in the cartoon there. But it is a granular product, and the active ingredient does have to get into the soil, be taken up by the roots, and then make it all the way to the shoots, right, the growing points. And depending on the size of the species or the size of the plants, it could take a while. Obviously, you get something that's 10 or 15 feet tall, it's going to take a while for the root uptake and make it all the way up to those shoots at the top of that plant. So in red at the top, the general recommendation for Cutlass 33G, again, because it's typically used on shrubs that are less than 7 feet, is trim plants to the desired size and shape 3 to 4 weeks after application. The Shrub and Tree Sculptor is 6 to 8 weeks, so trim 6 to 8 weeks after application. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to time the trimming when that PGR kicks in. Because if you make the application and then you trim, or you trim and you make the application, you're going to have some growth prior to that PGR kicking in. If you wait a little bit too long, you're going to trim some PGR out of the plant and reduce the length of regulation. So you want to kind of target that, let's say, 1 month after application for 33G and 2 months for Shrub and Tree Sculptor for that first trim. There are calibration trays in terms of rate available where you can actually stick the calibration trays up under the shrubs. Make your application, whether it's over the top or within the drip line. You see the picture on the right where you're kind of tilting it, and you see the material in the little cups there, and each cup's a different size. Depending on what rate you want to go at, and make sure that cup's level, and that is would be an appropriate calibration for, in this case, Cutlass 3.3 granular. All right, as in terms of showing growth suppression. This is Arbicola, obviously, is mainly a Florida species. But I like showing this photo because I think it does two things very well. It shows the darker green color, and it also shows the reduction in internode length. And I think that's important that, you may not all species are, as big and bushy as Arbicola, but knowing what these products, whether it's 3,3G in this case or Shrub and Tree Sculptor, are capable of, I think that you start to understand what to look for after you implement a PGR program. And in terms of growth suppression on Boxwood, this is 4 months after treatment, untreated on the left, Cutlass 3,3G on the right. Obviously hasn't been trimmed in 4 months. Moving into some tougher to regulate species, Clusia, again, South Florida species, untreated on the left, Cutlass Shrub and Tree Sculptor on the right. You can see the shorter, the smaller leaves, shorter internodes. And when you get into kind of a whole Clusia, and this is the same exact Clusia, but this is 14 months after treatment, and the Shrub and Tree Sculptor on the left-hand side has not been trimmed. The untreated has been trimmed 2 or 3 times. If you go to the photos on the far right there, you can really see the density that the Shrub and Tree Sculptor is providing compared to the untreated. Moving into Ligustrums, some fairly tall, 9 to 10 foot Ligustrums, 10 months after treatment. Untreated on the left, you can see the new shoots growing out there versus the Shrub and Tree Sculptor on the right. I mentioned flowering response when I started this conversation on landscape PGRs, and it's for real for a lot of species. Not all species, but for a lot. This happens to be Ixora. The Cutlass 3,3G is on the left, untreated on the right, and you can see the real pop of flowering, pop of color that you get. Knockout roses do the same thing. There are a variety of species that really produce the PGR produces a flowering response. All right, moving from a granular to the foliar PGR application, there are 3 foliar, at least active ingredients available for foliar applications. You've got Cutlass Quick Stop, which is fluprimidol, and then your paclibutrazole products, and then Atromec, that's been your only Class C that's been around for quite some time. I have in red here, kind of at the top left, this is the key difference in trimming relative to your PGR application between foliar and granular. If you remember anything, I was talking about granular and making the application and then waiting for a month or 2, depending on product. For these foliar products, you actually want to trim and then make that application after trimming. So within a week after trimming. Basically, you want to trim to shape. You want to spray it on before there's any new growth that starts. So the application rates are in fluid ounces per gallon of water, no matter what product. All the rates are based on the plant species. All the products cover about 400 to 500 square feet. Now that 400 to 500 square feet is 3-dimensional space. So if you look at the photo on the bottom right, whatever sides are showing, whatever sides you want regulated growth, you're going to have that add that up. A plus B plus C plus D. And probably the key to making effective foliar PGR applications are that you have consistent pressure, you spray to drip, and you make a uniform application. So if you don't have a uniform application, you're not going to have uniform regulation. I like to show this, uniform coverage is key slide. When this is actually a little demo that I did on a Burford Holly, where I treated half of it with foliar PGR and then didn't treat the other half. So it's literally the same shrub that's just half treated, half not. And this is about 2 months after treatment. And you can see exactly where I treated on the left versus where I did not treat on the right and in the back. So again, uniform coverage is key. If it's not uniform, you're not gonna see uniform regulation. Ligustrum, this is 51 days after treatment. You've got your foliar PGR on the left compared to untreated on the right, keeping it well regulated. Now, I did mention that There is variability between species. On the left-hand side here, we have Loropetalum. On the right is Ligustrum. So they're about the same size, 3 to 4 to 5 foot. But you can see the reduction in the orange bars where you're looking at about a 42% reduction after 107 days with the Loropetalum. You're still at 76% reduction with the Ligustrum. And I say that because you have to realize when you're going out in all landscapes, almost all landscapes are a mix of species, that you're going to have some, you're going to mix up a backpack sprayer with one rate and you're going to treat all the different shrubs. But you're going to have some that may have to be come back and be retreated a little sooner than others. And you don't want to get into a scenario with, like, say, the Ligustrums where you're spraying them every time and you get into an overregulation scenario. So I get asked all the time, what's the difference in regulation, growth suppression between the foliar PGR products? And I ran a little trial and looked at them all on these Loropetalums. This is photo showing about a month after treatment. They're all about the same. Maybe Atromech's growing out a little bit more than the Quick Stop and the Trim Tech. Everything's relative to the untreated in the top left. As you drag it out to about 3 months after treatment, look at the percent growth suppression and Quick Stop is about 50%, compared to Trim Tech at 35%, and about 25% at Atromech. And again, this is one species. I think Trim Tech and Quick Stop are fairly similar in the length of regulation across most species, and I think that they probably provide about a month or two longer regulation than Atromech in a lot of scenarios. The one thing that you can get into with paclobutrazol foliar products is residue. So this is actually 90 days after a treatment that I made. It was at a high rate of paclobutrazol, but that residue does stick around and it can be unsightly on foliage if you get into that scenario. All right, I briefly discussed the PGR calculator for the fairways, turf PGR calculator for fairways. We also have a calculator for landscape PGR. So whether we're talking about Quick Stop or we're talking about 3,3G or Shrub and Tree Sculptor, basically you can go select your plant species and the height and the area of the bed and then your labor. And I ran a quick scenario. It's a season-long program for 1,000 square feet of landscape bed, 5-foot tall roses. Trimmings per year without PGRs, 12. So let's say a 6-month season with 2 trimmings per month. Trimmings with PGRs, again, when I mentioned using PGRs, you can probably cut your trimming in half. Number of PGR applications, 2. Labor at $15 an hour. And ultimately, what you get down to at the bottom in the red is if you go with the Cutlass 33G program, you're going to save on those roses that are 5 foot tall, you're going to save about $281 per 1,000 square feet of rose bed. And that's obviously paying for the PGR program as well. If you go Quick Stop program, it's $344 per 1,000 square feet of rose bed. So just like on the fairway calculator, there is an opportunity. It does not fit all scenarios. But there is an opportunity to save some money on trimming for sure using landscape PGRs. The last PGR topic I want to touch on is PGRs for edging and banding applications. So any areas that are string trimmed, edged, around mailboxes, beds, parking lots, curbs, and sidewalks. There are 2 products. Primo's labeled for banding applications, and then Edgeless. Edgeless is very similar to Legacy in that it's a combination of Cutlass and Primo. So with Primo, it's just a straight Class A late GA inhibitor with foliar absorption. With the Edgeless, you have your Class A plus Class B. Again, you get your root plus foliar absorption, and you're going to get not only more growth suppression than straight Trenex Pack or Primo alone, but you're going to get less rebound as you were on the a turf fairway type situation. All right, in terms of the application methods, you want the turf grass to be actively growing. Obviously, you're not probably trimming anything that's not growing. Spring applications made after everything starts growing. If we're talking about warm season grasses, make sure they're completely greened up and growing. The final application about a month prior to the first hard frost. You want the edge or string trim prior to making the PGR application. So, go through edge, string trim, make sure you get back in there to make that application before things start growing again. The key, much like foliar applications to landscape, to shrubs, the key is uniform applications. So walk at a normal speed, 2 to 3 miles an hour, and keep the wand, if you're using a backpack, very steady. Don't sway it side to side, or you will not have uniform regulation. All right, what's this look like? It simply looks like a band, and I mean it depends on how often you're mowing the other turf, but you can blend it very easy. But it keeps you from having to come back and string trim or edge every single week, as is the case with the traditional program. So this happens to be a tall fescue 3 weeks after treatment. This is 419 Bermuda grass. This is actually at my house, a treatment that I made 5 weeks after treatment, and did not have to come back and string trim until about 8 weeks after treatment in this little trial that I ran. So it works very, very well with the banding application. But again, I'll stress that you have to make a uniform application or you will not get uniform regulation. All right, last calculator. We have one more. This one is for edging banding. And again, you put in your species and then your chemical cost, and you can calculate basically how much you can save per 8 fluid ounce bottle of Edgeless. So you take a 419 Bermuda grass strain trimming program over an 8-week period. Your trimmings without PGR to be 8, trimmings with PGR made about 3. Your labor at $15 an hour, and you can go down to the bottom bullet. In red, you save about $380 per 8 fluid ounce bottle of Edgeless. Then you're going to ask me, well, how much does an 8 fluid ounce bottle of Edgeless cover? And it kind of depends on your species. So if you look up here, your Edgeless program versus your traditional string trimming program, in this case, it's going to cover about 11,000 linear feet per 8 ounce bottle. So 11,428 linear feet. You're every 11,428 feet, you're going to save about $380 using Edgeless. So with that, I'll wrap up my my talk on PGRs. I appreciate everyone listening. Again, my name's Kyle Briscoe, and I'm Technical Development Manager with C Corporation, and my contact information on this is on this slide. Feel free to email, call, or text if you have any questions. Thanks again.